I remember the moment where I paid off the debt, looked at my bank account, realized I couldn't buy a slice of pizza. And I'm like, I'm technically better off than I was when I started paying off this debt, but I feel as bad as when I started paying off the debt. So for the future debts that I had, I started to make sure that I was saving while I was paying off my debts, which meant I paid those debts off slower. And you mentioned it can take, up to a decade or more to pay off your debts. But if you're not building your wealth while you're paying off your debts, you're actually putting yourself back because wealth takes time to grow.
Welcome to the Teacher Money Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Shaun Morgan, a full-time teacher. That's right, I teach every day just like you, and personal financial coach. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights or a new educator navigating your first paycheck, to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life. The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. I'm super excited to have Clifton Corbin on the show today. Clifton is a fantastic human being and a brilliant financial person. He was a business consultant with over 2 decades of experience when he left the office to become a full-time stay-at-home dad. And during that time, he authored his first book, Your Kids, Their Money, which focuses on providing parents with the skills and tools to teach financial literacy to their children. But he is also the author of The Richest Person in Babylon, a reimagining of the classic book, The Richest Man in Babylon, which we're going to talk about today. Clifton, welcome to the show.
Shaun, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. So, like I said, we're talking about the richest person in Babylon. Let's talk about that first. Just
Sure.
why did you write this book? What did you need to change in the book to make it relevant today?
Sure. So I'll start with where it came from. So The Richest Man in Babylon has been one of my favorite books since for as long as I can remember. It's a book that is, it's always on top 10 lists when we talk to personal finance experts, often recommended. So a couple years ago, I decided to read it to my son, who was about 10 years old at the time. I know I'm a money nerd. I'm reading a personal finance book to my 10-year-old son, but it's a story full of little stories, and I thought it'd be good for him to, start taking in some of these key concepts. So I started reading it to him, and I quickly realized when I saw the glassy look in his eyes, as teachers, you could probably all recognize that look. He didn't know what I was saying. And it wasn't so much that the concepts were beyond him, it was that the book is, just shy of 100 years old when I was trying to read it to him. And the language that's in the book, it was written to be kind of poetic and have this like, I don't know, theologic language in it with all these flourishes. So the language itself just didn't speak to him. It was hard for him to grasp the concepts. And then in addition to that, it was, like I said, it was written 100 years ago. So it was written for a predominantly male audience, and it just seemed very dated and stodgy, and it needed to be refreshed. So I spoke to a publishing friend of mine. He told me that a book 100 years old likely has its copyright has long since run out. So I talked to a lawyer and made sure that was the case. And it's like, yep, the copyright has run its course. The book is now in the public domain, which means it's free to be reinterpreted or do whatever you want with it. So I said, okay, well, this is a great opportunity to take this book that is still great, still has great knowledge, great concepts, a good base, a good foundation, and then update it with more modern language, and then update the characters so it could speak to a broader swath of the population. Because, like I said, when it was first written, it was written primarily with a focus on men and men, taking care of the household. And that's just not the way we live anymore. The world is much more, diverse. It always has been, but at least now we're acknowledging it. So I wanted to make sure I could express that within the text, within the characters, within the stories. So with my son as my co-editor, I started reading it to him, and when I saw that glassy look in his eyes, I would rewrite it, and then I would read it to him again. And when I could see that he understood the concept, like, oh, I'm supposed to keep some of all the money I make. I'm like, bingo, that stays in. And then I went through that line by line throughout the whole book. Luckily, it's not a very long book, or else this never would have ended. But it was a fun process. So he and I co-edited the book to make it, like I said, more up to date, more engaging, make the language a little easier to read, make it just a little easier to pull in all the different concepts. So that's why he is also on the cover as a co-editor, since we worked on it together. So it is on the title Richest Person in Babylon, but the title, of course, is still The Richest Man in Babylon. But again, trying to really hammer home that we're trying to be a lot more inclusive in this version.
Yeah, so we changed the language. Yeah, it's written very archaic, right? It's meant to be have like kind of like the thee and thou type of language going on in it,
Exactly, exactly.
because it supposedly took place like 3,000 years ago, even though it's a made up story, uh, and making it more inclusive. But did any of the financial principles in the book change?
So I didn't change the principles. I wanted it to remain as true to the original stories as possible without taking anything away. Now, mind you, and I'm sure we're going to get into some of these concepts in a little while. I do think some of them could use some updating, which is actually why I'm working on another project with the Richest Man in Babylon. I'm working on like a commemorative 100-year anniversary edition, so I can actually talk a little bit more about those pieces that might need a little bit of nuance and a little bit of updating. But in the version that's currently out right now, no, that one just I took the stories, I updated the language, I updated the characters, I made it easier to understand, but the concepts themselves are all the same. So even the ones that might be a little bit problematic, I think I just left them there for people to take what they could from them. Because again, you know, as educators, everyone knows that you can't shove everything down someone's throat, right? Like you have to put it out there and let people take it, let them go to where they are, right? So I wanted to make it accessible, but I didn't want to, force anything down anyone's throat, for lack of a better phrase. So it's still very much the same stories, the same concepts, without what I think is necessary, which is a little bit of nuance, with the exception of one chapter. I thought one chapter really missed the mark when it came to the original book, which would be The Walls of Babylon. I felt like that one, whenever I read that chapter in the original version, it didn't speak to me. I knew what the author was trying to do. He was trying to talk about protecting your wealth, but it just never hit home for me. So I did take that chapter, I scrapped it. I was just like, I never liked this chapter. This is my version of the book. I'm not including this chapter. And I rewrote it completely with a whole different story that I think better encapsulates what I think the author was trying to do. Um, I'll let the readers be the judge if I hit the mark or not there. But for the most part, the stories keep the original stories, the original parables, the original concepts.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk through some of those concepts.
Sure.
What like so one of the lists of concepts is the 7 cures of a lean purse. I'm not sure if you can just list those off the top of your head or anything, but
I don't know if I can list them off the top of my head, but if you bear with me, I could probably look off screen and see them because I always have my notes around. But let's see. So the first one is to fatten thy purse. The second one is to cure your expenses. The last one is to make your gold multiply. Guard your treasure. Guard thy treasure from loss. Make your dwelling a profitable investment. Ensure for future income. And the last one is increase your ability to earn. So those are the seven, and we can dive into each of those individually. But I think the even more valuable than the seven specifically, I think the first one that kind of is emblematic or most notable from the book is the concept of paying yourself first. I think when folks think of The Richest Man in Babylon and the aha moment that most people get when reading that, which is one of the it's not the first chapter, but it's kind of the first story in the book. It's the story about how you need to make sure that you set some money aside for yourself before you pay your bills, before you go and buy anything that you want. It's making sure that you pay yourself first. That phrase is kind of I think the biggest phrase that comes from the book. But we can get into any of the seven the cures for a lean person as well. But I think the core of all of those kind of stem from the pay yourself first concept.
yeah, let's start with pay yourself first, and then we can maybe swing back around to some of
Sure.
like lightly touch on the rest of them, because that one really is super important. And the reason why I think this one is so hard for people is because we feel like, well, we get to the end of the month and there's no money left, right? How
Right.
can you pay yourself first? So if you have a limited budget, if you're not on a high salary, like the people listening to this are going to be teachers, generally not a high salary profession. What does paying yourself look like? How does that even work?
Sure. So I think the beauty in the concept of paying yourself first isn't even in the action, it's in the mindset shift that it requires you to make. So paying yourself first, it's asking you to make yourself the priority, making sure that before you go out and spend money on bills, make sure you do anything, the first thing that you're doing before you do anything else is that you're making sure that you pay yourself first, that you ensure that you save before you do anything else. So that's the value that comes with it.
Right, you turn yourself into a bill basically, that your investment is a bill to be paid, and you can't skip that bill, right? And if you do that, just like you wouldn't skip a mortgage or a car payment, you're gonna, you know, have wealth grow without even thinking about it. Of course, you have to do other things, but that is a huge part of it. And teachers, we should understand this concept, because we have a bajillion things that we're supposed to do in a school year, but realistically, we can do like seven. And we talk about the big rocks thing, where you put in the big rocks into the jar first, and then you put into the medium-sized rocks, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, and that fills it in. You can put everything in if you do that, but if you start with sand and then the pebbles and then the medium rocks, the big rocks won't fit. Right.
Exactly.
And when you're thinking about pay yourself first, that's your big rock. You put in your own money first, you pay yourself first. And then, just because of the way the world seems to work, everything fills in around it, right? You pay
Right.
yourself, and then you pay, your major bills, and you pay your, main things that you have to pay for every single month that are not bills, but like, like food and things like that you just need to have. Then you fill it in with, your fun stuff after that. And you still have a really good life, even if you take that money right off the top for yourself at the beginning.
I love how you phrase that. It's yeah, the other piece of it, if you want to get into the way it works, is that you're learning to live within your means. It's as simple as that, right? It's making sure that before you spend or overspend or what have you, that you've taken some of your money to start building that wealth, building that nest egg, building that saving, building that emergency fund, and it just shrinks the amount of money that you have available to spend on all the other things. So, there's other ways of saying it, like it puts up guardrails to make sure that you're not spending all of the money that you have. It makes sure that you're prioritizing your future worth. So there's all these different things that just that simple phrase and that simple concept of making sure that the first person who gets access to your money is you. It has all these downstream benefits, which is why I think the book has been so valuable and has resonated with so many people, is because if they could start living that one principle, all the other things kind of fall in place very quickly. It makes sure that, we have a tendency to, live to the max. We maximize the value of the home we can buy, the car we can buy, the food, the quality of the food we can buy. But if we do that and we haven't set some money aside before we do that, then we will spend all our money. So you could still live with that maximizing tendency if the first thing you did was carve out some of that money for yourself. So there's all, like I said, there's a lot of downstream benefits that come from paying yourself first. And your rock analogy is exactly right. When we do it, we adapt. We're adaptive people. We're adaptive species. So we will find a way to make sure that after we've done this step, we make the rest work. It's not necessarily easy, and it can be bumpy along the way. And I think that's one of the things that Clayson being the author, might have not articulated well in his text. It's not necessarily easy for that lifestyle change to happen, but it can happen. And when it does happen, there's a lot of benefits for it.
I always say that money management is simple, but it's not easy, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's right.
very hard to do it right, because it's not about knowing what to do, it's about actually doing it. And
Exactly.
that is the hard part for sure. How do you go about implementing this principle in your life?
Sure.
Mechanically, what do you do?
Sure. So I automate as much as I can. So when it comes to any money that's coming into the household, a portion of that is going into retirement funding right away. A portion of that's going into savings. We have, an emergency fund that we try to keep at a certain level. So, if we have to draw down on that, we always try to refill it as quickly as we can. So automating, I think, is probably the easiest way. For educators, it's making sure that those 401ks are properly funded, especially if there's any matching that could happen. And unfortunately, I don't know if this has changed, but a lot of times those 401ks and all of these retirement accounts are things that you have to opt into. They're not necessarily by default something that you're a part of. So one of the things I encourage folks is to make sure that you've opted in as much as possible. The other piece of it, and this is kind of it's tangential to it, but it's making sure that, we get sometimes if we hear this and we're like, I love this, I want to do it, and we go a little too far, right? One of the things that Clayson actually mentions is doing it within reason, right? Because the last thing we want to do is throw off the balance. We don't want to all of a sudden make it so that we can't live off of the remaining portion that we haven't paid ourselves. So it's important to, if this is new, to do it within reason. 10% is kind of what Clayson recommends. I know there's a very active, retire early, financial independence, retire early community that encourages much higher rates than 10%. And I'm not opposed to that, but what I do try to advise is do whatever makes sense for you to be able to stick to. Because if it's become so cumbersome that you've carved out so much of your income that you can't actually do it, but you can't actually live off of the remaining portion, then you're going to fall back into old habits. So it's really important to find that balance. So while 10% might not seem like a lot, especially if you're hoping to retire early, it might be a good place to start and then increase it incrementally over time. So but as far as the nitty gritty, it's really for me. And now that we've have access to all these automation tools, it's making sure a lot of those debits coming right out of your account as soon as you get paid, that can go directly into accounts that are somewhat sheltered. So retirement accounts, whether that be IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, so that you don't have that temptation to draw down on it because it's kind of protected.
Yeah, and teachers in the United States, because Clifton's in Canada, for those who don't know, we have it's called 403B, which is kind of like a 401k,
Right.
like worse. So if you don't, just remember, guys, if you don't have a good 403B, you can always go to 403bwise.org and find out if you have a good one or not. Then use any of the other accounts we have. There are plenty of different places you can put it that are protected and a good place to invest. Just make sure you're choosing the right spot. I like how Cliff was talking about making it protected, because if it's easy to access, it's really easy to raid that as well. So just getting it into those retirement spots, or those places where you don't really want to pull it from, like you can, it feels like painful to pull it out of there. That's the place to put it. Make the separation as large as possible. I also really like the ability that a lot of HR departments have is to just give your direct deposit two locations, right? So you can
Mhm.
say, look, I want 10% to go to this other account. You never even see it. It doesn't even touch your, first checking account, so it goes there automatically. It's a really powerful tool to pay yourself first, because it's literally first and you have no say in the matter, right? You don't even have to wait for the automation to kick into place, because it happens before it even arrives in your account. All right, so that being said, let's go back to the seven cures of the lean purse. So once you have money
Sure.
set aside to, that's just paying yourself first, does it just sit there? What
Right. So the next steps are, well, one, so the making sure money's set aside is kind of the first cure. It's really about making sure that you're paying yourself first. The next one is about budgeting, which is controlling your expenses, making sure that you actually know where the money's coming from and where it's going, so you're living within a budget. With regards to what you're asking, what you do with that money once you've been able to set it aside, that would be the third cure, which is making it multiply. So we're talking about investing here. Clayson doesn't get too into the weeds when it comes to investing. He talks more about the broad principles of investing. So diversifying, mitigating risk, being informed. That was a big one. So he talks a lot about making sure you're talking to trusted advisors, that you're not going after the big money wins that we hear about, like the multi-level marketing, the any of the things that are a sure thing. He's very clearly trying to advise people to be very wary of any sure things or high return possibilities, because we know most times those turn out to be fraudulent, they turn out to be scams. So he's really critically saying be very cautious with what you do with your savings, because it's so important that we build that savings so that we could start using that savings to make it multiply. Because As we've all seen over the last couple of years, inflation is real. And if we're not making sure our money is growing past the rate of inflation, then we're actually losing buying power and actually kind of losing out. So it's critical to make sure that we're actually investing that money. So again, he doesn't get into what means you should go into. He does talk a little bit about, gold and real estate and I think he mentions, having a herd, but I don't think anyone's going to be buying a herd of anything. Although, maybe you want to get a couple goats.
You
Texas would be a
could you
great
could
place for
buy a
goats.
herd.
Yeah, you can buy a herd. There's tons of herds. But I don't know if that's, the best investment for most, maybe for some, but that's
Something that
kind
I
of,
really liked from this section, I believe it's from this section, is the story of the guy, his first investment was with like a shield maker who was
yes.
going to get gems, I think it was. And he's like, why on earth would you invest with a shield maker who's not
With
making
gems.
shields, right? Like
Right.
that's not what he's about. So I love that portion that sticks with me as something that's really important. It's like you want to invest in something that makes sense, something you understand, and with someone who knows what they're doing. Right? Like there
Right.
has to be that expertise in there with
Yeah. He really hammers home that there should be a baseline of understanding. I usually frame it as, when you're investing, the goal is that your money is making money. And if you can't really understand how that money is supposed to make money, right? As soon as you start asking questions to either an advisor or someone who's trying to encourage you to invest with them, if you can't understand the through line of I do this and this happens and this is how your money will grow, then red flag should at least be, going up, because we need to have that baseline understanding. And that's right, like the story of how Arcad, the main character, the richest man in Babylon, started his investing journey. It's probably why the book resonates with so many people. He does articulate that he made a lot of mistakes. He did invest with people who were not skilled in the things that he was hoping that they were going to be able to bring money in with. And there's other stories throughout the book that are similar to that same story, where it's like, this is a knowledgeable person, they know this field, this is something that we can hopefully they can use those skills, those experience, to then use your capital and then capitalize on that opportunity. When that's not the case, again, red flags should be going up.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so one big problem that teachers face is that we have student loan debt, but we don't usually have the incomes to like handle that well. And there are loan forgiveness programs,
Hmm.
but it's a stressor there for
For
10
sure.
years if you stick out that whole time. How does this book address handling debt?
So there is a story closer to the end of the book that is specifically about debt. It talks quite a bit. There's one story that talks about someone who kind of runs away from his debt and all the trouble that entails. It doesn't lead to a happy ending until he decides to face his debt. He kind of calls it his enemy that he needs to face. And that one resonates with me because that's kind of how I got into this space. I had a lot of debt myself, coming out of college, and I ran from it for quite some time, and then eventually I decided to face it. And the same thing, as soon as I decided to face it, things got better. But with regards to Clayson and what he advises, it's basically, it's a plan of finding all your debts, defining a payment plan that works within your budget, while still doing the pay yourself first, while still making sure you're building wealth, while you're still saving, while you're still investing, and slowly pay down those debts. So there's different methods of doing that. So you can go after the ones that have the highest interest first, or you can go after the ones that are the smallest amount first, kind of do that snowball method. He doesn't really advise, I guess he's advising more of the former than the latter. He doesn't really say one way is better than the other. He just kind of says, when you're doing it, make sure you're paying yourself first. And again, for me, just my personal story, when I was coming out of college, I had the same scenario. I had multiple debts that I was dealing with. And when I first started paying them off, I was just like, I just need to get this thing off my back. It felt like this, the albatross on my back, that I needed to get it off. And so I started paying. I paid heavily. I didn't save anything. I just paid and I paid and I paid until one of my debts was done, and it was good, but I didn't feel good. I still looked at like my bank account and realized I couldn't. I remember the moment where I paid off the debt, looked at my bank account, realized I couldn't buy a slice of pizza, and I'm like, I'm technically better off than I was when I started paying off this debt, but I feel as bad as when I started paying off the debt. So for the future debts that I had, I started to make sure that I was saving while I was paying off my debts, which meant I paid those debts off slower. And you mentioned it can take, up to a decade or more to pay off your debts. But if you're not building your wealth while you're paying off your debts, you're actually putting yourself back because wealth takes time to grow. Our investments take time to grow. There's going to be dips in the market, there's going to be ups and downs. So we need to start that investment journey as early as we can. And the saying goes, like, the best time to start investing was yesterday, the next best time to start is today. So we need to start to save and invest while we're paying down our debts. Because I tell you, after I paid off my next debt, I looked at my bank account. I didn't just have money for a slice of pizza. I actually had some money in there. I had a couple $1,000s saved up, and I felt a lot better. It wasn't just like I felt the alleviation of having that debt paid off. It was like, okay, I actually have money that's my own. Not to quote Gollum, but it felt like my precious. It was my own that I could own and have, and it really did feel like it was something special, even though it was. I still had other debts that I had to pay. I now had a little bit of a nest egg that I had started to build up. So the method that you use to pay down your debt, it's really on up to you whether you want to, attack the one with the highest interest rate first, which is probably what, most economists will say makes sense. But at the same time, if we're talking about incentives, some economists will say pay off the smallest one first and then take the money that you're using for the smallest one and put it towards the next smallest one. So you get that snowball effect of feeling that elation and that excitement and that motivation as you see more and more of your debts go away. But regardless of what method you use, I really encourage you to make sure that you're also, saving and paying yourself first while you do it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about a principle here recently. I want to get your take on it just to, live hash this out.
Yes, please.
So we're talking about, let's say you have multiple debts on multiple credit cards, right? And each of those credit cards have a minimum balance. So people talk about paying off the largest first for the interest rate benefit and the smallest first for the mental benefit. But I'm wondering if paying off the smallest first for the cash flow wiggle room of you don't have that minimum balance that has to come out. So I mean, like if you're putting $100 a month towards your debt, and now you have that $25 a month that you have to pay or whatever.
Right,
That it's a minimum $25, so there's no wiggle room on that $25 that has to
right,
happen. Now you
right,
have the wiggle room when you're moving on to the next one that you can say, okay, I want that $25 to go towards, this debt or this other
or
thing that's
something.
happening or this, investment. There's that benefit of just not having the cash flow crunch much more
Right.
than like just the mental, like, yay, I did it. What are your thoughts on that?
I like where you're going with that. I think for me, at least the way I do my budgeting, it's I've set aside X amount for debt payments. So yes, now that I don't have that debt, I've got more wiggle room because, I don't have to pay the minimum payment, but I still have set this amount aside for debt payments, whether that be, let's say, I've got three debts. I'm paying $100 on each of them, give or take. But I decide I'm gonna, pay the minimum on two of them and pay the most on one of them. Regardless, I'm still going to pay that $300 every month. And then when that one's done, I'm still going to pay that. So for me, the wiggle room is less valuable because I've set aside a certain amount for debt payment until that's all gone. And then now I feel like I've got wiggle room because I don't have those debt payments at all. Um, Again, it's personal. So we all say this, personal finance is personal first. It's what do you need to feel comfortable? If you feel like you need that wiggle room in your cash flow, like right now, everything's so tight that even making, those debt payments, it just feels crushing, then maybe you can't do what I just described. You don't have the resources to set aside a set amount. So once you get that one done, you really do need to carve that other piece out for, other expenses or other parts of your life. That's fine. Like there's, all of these, all of us, we're no judgment zone people. So whatever makes the most sense for your finances is what we advise. Um, but the thing that I think makes the most sense for us is that we focus on it and we find a system, we find a process that works for you.
Right. Most important thing is not why you chose it, it's that you actually do it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, so I think it's so funny that we debate over things like, do you pay the highest balance or the highest interest, or do you pay the, mortgage off or you don't or whatever. It's like whatever you do, as long as you're making a smart financial move, like one that's actually putting you towards the positive, it's beneficial. So
Exactly.
like the order of magnitude between uh, uh, the difference of paying off the highest interest and the lowest balance or whatever, it's going to be so small in the long term that it doesn't really make a huge difference. Whatever one you are going to do that motivates you is the one that makes the most difference.
Exactly. Exactly. But with that said, do you have a preference one way or the other?
Well, I like the third option that people don't always include, which is the lasso version, where you take those high interest debts and you are able to like put them into the low interest credit cards, like the you can get like a promotional thing, and that just like caps the interest that's coming out of it, so you can crush that faster. Um, Mathematically, it works. Uh, yeah, so that's what I think is probably the mathematically smartest way, and I just like the feeling of like the interest accumulation is not happening right now. And usually when you get a new card, they give you a bonus too, so you can get a little windfall as well towards paying off your debt. I just think it's a powerful thing that only works if you have good credit already. So if your credit's been wrecked, that's not going to work. And
Right.
if you have the discipline with a new card to not just fill it up. So
Exactly.
that is that's the caveat on using that method. If you do not have the discipline for that, then I think that the smallest, I think I like the idea of the smallest balance over the highest interest rate, just because most of money is psychology, and having the psychological benefit more than the mathematical benefit, I think is going to win most of any time.
I agree with you. And I think the way you put it there, the discipline is the most essential part, especially when it comes to budgeting and debt reduction, which kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, awesome. So just winding it up here, is there any other part of the book that we haven't talked about that you just love that you want to bring up?
Oh gosh, the book itself, just the way it was written with these small narrative stories. I think, again, I've mentioned a few reasons why I think the book has resonated with people. So, two things, especially for educators, I think that will really hit home for why I think the book is so valuable. One, the narrative stories. I think we all recognize that storytelling is how most people learn and learn effectively. And this book does it masterfully. It does. It has all these short stories that have principles and values built into them, but it's not overly heavy-handed with them, right? So it kind of it guides you through. It's got some repetition in it, but it's again, it's not in a bad way. So we have again, I'm speaking to educators. You need to hear something more than once before you can take it in, and this book has that. And I think the last piece of the book, a theme that runs through the entire book, which I think is the reason why, and I didn't realize this until recently, why I resonate with it so much. Almost every story in the book is some type of mentor mentee teacher student relationship, right? Like it's someone who has gone through trials and tribulations and learned something, but they're not trying to hoard their knowledge. In fact, they're very eager to find willing students to teach what they've learned. And that type of relationship and seeing it written in such an effective way of showing that an effective way of learning, other than just trial and error, which you do see in the book, is to find advisors who are willing to spend time with you. The original story, The Richest Man in Babylon, the second chapter in the book, it's a story of this one person who's curious, who wants to be wealthy. He recognizes the value of having wealth and not struggling, and finds this mentor, someone who is wealthy. And over the course of years, this person, this mentor, advises him, gives him a chance to learn these lessons, gives him a chance to try. And then through his trials and tribulations, they build this relationship that turns into this great mentor mentee relationship that I think, again, that story or that theme kind of is spread throughout the book. And I think that is probably why I enjoy it so much because as I've gotten older and as I've had a chance to mentor some people. I've seen the value of that relationship, and I've seen how it can really help, elevate people from all levels to get to their full potential. So I think that, among, like, again, the financial principles within the book are spectacular. That's why you and I love it, Sean. But that, I think, is also something, as someone who's constantly trying to learn and trying to share what I've learned. I think that's something that just, it really hits home for me.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so glad I asked that question, because that was probably one of my most favorite things that you said. Is just that a mentor and then don't hoard your knowledge. Love that. Love that. Okay. Last two questions for you. What is your number one tip for teachers to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life?
Oh goodness, it is to be intentional. We talked about being consistent, but also being intentional, right? If we run away from, unfortunately, money can still be a daunting subject to face, especially when we're in some financial straits. But facing it and being intentional with what we do with our finances, what we do with our money. We talk about how, what we spend our time on is what we prioritize and what we care about. It's also the same for what we spend our money on. But because we're not intentional with our money, we spend our money in, I don't want to use the word frivolous ways, but not aligned with our values, not aligned with our goals. So really focusing and being intentional with how we use our money and what we do with our money is, I think, probably the best way to live those goals that you mentioned.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And then the last question is, how can a teacher who's interested in what you do connect with you and learn more about you?
Sure. All right, yeah. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at cliftoncorbin.com. You can find my books there. You can find my blog there. I also run a free virtual summit called Raising Generational Wealth. The 2025 summit will be May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. You can go find all the information about that at raisinggenerationalwealth.com. And for educators, I've got a free money workbook. You can print it, use it in your classrooms. You can use it with your kids. It's at kidsmoneyworkbook.com. It's fun, it's printable. My kids have liked it. I know lots of other kids and other teachers who've used it. So you can go there and grab your copy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Clifton, for sharing your wisdom and for writing this book in a way that maybe you could use in your classroom. So if you are interested in the book, you can go to teachermoneyshow.com/podcast, and I'll link to it, or you can check out the show notes in the podcast player, and I'll have a link to that show notes page directly, where you can get a copy of the book. And if you want the workbook, you can also find that there. So thank you, Clifton, for your time. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Clifton, for coming on the show. That was a ton of fun. I loved learning all about your book, The Richest Person in Babylon, and getting to dive into those principles from that original story, The Richest Man in Babylon, in a fun and engaging way. If you're wondering how you can apply these principles from The Richest Man in Babylon, or you need help getting out of debt or raising your income, whatever your question is about money, I can help. Go to teachermoneyshow.com/coaching, and we can set up a time either to meet on the podcast or meet one-on-one. I'm looking forward to helping you. Now on to the cliff notes. First cliff note, pay yourself first. This idea of putting money away for you right up front is the most important concept from The Richest Man in Babylon. I really hope that you apply this, because this is the one thing that gives yourself wiggle room that allows you to grow wealth over time. Number two, automate it. If you're going to pay yourself first, don't make it so that you have to literally pay yourself first. Make the computer do it. Human beings are terrible at keeping up habits that are maybe a little bit painful, but you're pretty good at doing it once. So if you can do the one thing, the one time, to start paying yourself first automatically with a computer, you won't have to think about it again, and you won't have to make yourself do it. Like going to the gym. Wouldn't it be great if a computer could just make you go to the gym instead of you having to do it yourself? That is what automating it does for you in the pay yourself first process. Number three, be cautious with your savings when you invest. You don't want to invest in risky things that are going to cause you to lose it. This goes along with the number four cliff note, which is understand what you invest in. So make sure that you understand it and that you are being cautious with it, not going for guarantees, and you know that the person that you're investing with is an expert in that, and you're not just putting money in because somebody told you to, or they guaranteed you a high return. Those two, number 3 and 4, about being cautious and understanding that investment, are key to a strong investment portfolio. Number 5, when you are in debt, you need to define your debt and your payments, and then start making those payments without cutting the pay yourself first process. Paying yourself first is not about paying debts. Paying yourself first is about building wealth. You need to build the wiggle room outside of that, if possible, to pay off your debts. So that way you continue to accumulate wealth over time. Number 6, when you are paying off debt, it doesn't matter what thing you choose as long as you choose the one that's actually going to work for you. Choosing the debt payoff method that you will stick to is vastly more important than the math behind which one will save you the most money in the long term. Because if you don't stick to it, guaranteed that one will not save you the most money in the long run. Number 7, this was one of my favorite things that he said. Get a mentor and don't hoard your knowledge. When you're starting out, having a mentor to guide you and help you along the way to help mold your mindset, to help point out when you're making mistakes, or to go to when you've made a mistake, is so valuable to get you back on track. When you try and figure it out yourself, you go much, much slower every single time. But then once you've gained that knowledge, don't hoard it. Go back and tell other people. Go talk to those other teachers that are new, and don't be that old curmudgeon teacher who lords their pension over the other people, or don't say, well, you need to do this or that to increase your teacher income, and good luck, kid, right? Walk there with them, help them out every step of the way, and make sure they know that you're a resource they can turn to. That is the power of being a good mentor, is when you have a good mentor, you turn around and then you can mentor other people. So make sure you're doing that, and just keeping that cycle going will lift everybody up in the teacher community. Okay. And then number 8, be intentional on what you spend your money on. Just this last thing, basically, as he said, going out the door, don't spend money on things that don't matter to you. If you're intentional about the things you spend your money on, then you will keep more of your money because you're not spending on things that don't matter to you, and you'll be happier with your purchases because it'll be something that aligns with your values. I'm super excited for you to read about and apply the principles found in The Richest Man or The Richest Person in Babylon. This book is a fantastic resource to begin your knowledge, get your mindset right, and have these stories in mind that you can hark back to when you are trying to remember the right choices to make with your money. But regardless of how you gain your knowledge, I know that you will be wealthy, because as a teacher, you're already rich. Your wallet just needs to catch up. Are you worried you won't have enough money to retire? Or maybe you just don't know how you're going to get out of all of this debt. Whatever your situation is, I can help you. Go to teachermoneyshow.com/guest and fill out the form there, and you can come on the show for free coaching, or we can meet one-on-one to discuss your needs. I look forward to talking to you.